First take.
My name's
This,
James,
my name's Justin.
and you're back for the new and
Mhm.
improved Verse Take.
That's right. That's right. This episode's a little bit different. We don't actually have a poem or any poets in particular. We're doing a little. This is a recap episode.
Right.
Yep. From what we're calling season one. Those are our first 24, I believe, or 22 episodes.
The first 22 episodes, we're going to sort of corral them into season one.
Hmm.
And then we're going to move on into season two. And I guess season two is going to be a little bit more focused, a
Yeah.
little bit
Yep.
more streamlined.
Yep, that's the goal, and we're gonna break it up into seasons. Fall and spring is the plan, and yeah, that way we can focus on a handful of poets, and then take a little break because we both have different creative projects that we like to do outside of this. I know you guys probably think that this is the only thing we do, but but and that way we can kind of come refreshed and always talk about what we learned, and yeah, I think it'll be better for the format.
I think so as well. And then we'll have like a set amount. And for season two, we want to bring in six poets.
Hmm.
Um, did we ever write them down? The
We
six?
we did, and I'm pulling them up right now as we were going on. I was like, oh, hold on a second, I need to have
Right,
that.
pull
So
them all.
first episode we're gonna be starting with Billy Collins, which is I'm pretty excited about that one. Then we got Charles Bukowski. So all our Bukowski bros out there, get ready for that. Then we're gonna come back to Mary Oliver. So we were going to do her about, I don't know how long ago that was, several months ago, and then we kind of we our focus has drifted, and then after that we're gonna go with Percy Shelley, and then we got Lord Byron and T.S. Eliot.
All right,
So that's
yeah.
a pretty jam packed, so a lot
So
of
the
big
next six
names there.
episodes should be great.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it, and we got some people 20th century, um, some people who are still alive, into the 21st century, and going back to a few romantics as well, which you know, those are I've always been some of my favorites.
Mine as well. And the romantics into the 20th century. Those are also some of our have been some of our more popular episodes.
Hmm.
So
Yep. Yep.
might as well lean in
Yep.
and gonna try to bring you guys some of the best poetry commentary on
That's
the
right.
net.
That's right. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but we are actually the number one poetry podcast on YouTube that has features two guys talking about one specific poet and bringing a poem each. We're the best one that does that.
Right.
We are, and that's official. That's number one. I talked to the producers, and they let me know I could say that.
Right.
Um,
So
so
hey, it's not easy being
right.
cheesy.
And no. But hey, so that's what we're planning on doing. But we also want to kind of recap the first season. So what James, I mean, hey, what'd you learn? What'd you
Well, to be honest, one of my favorite parts from the first season was our Lee Bai episode.
mm,
I never actually read too much into Chinese poetry
mm-hmm,
or really even thought about it in any real capacity.
mm-hmm,
It was Ezra Pound who kind
mm,
of would sort of kind of do some pseudo translations of Chinese poetry, trying to kind of capture the spirit of some of it. And so through my research of him, kind of led me to Li Bai, sort of like the famous one of China's famous poets. And I really enjoyed his poetry. I enjoyed kind of the idea of when you're in the city, you kind of have to be more buttoned up
mm,
and more sort of uptight. But you go off by yourself into the country, you can drink yourself silly and you can sort of spin around in circles and fall down without having to keep up these sort of social graces. So I kind of like Lee Bai and his movement from sort of this uptight life in the city to kind of going and getting drunk by yourself in the woods. And being from South Carolina, I've too have been drunk in the woods. So
Mm-hmm.
that was
Yeah,
one of my favorite parts of season one.
yeah, yeah. I think my yeah, I can't quite narrow it down. Um, but I think, if I were to give three that like really I enjoyed Charles Simic just because I never had read him before. So, and I felt like he's become maybe a favorite of mine. I really enjoyed reading Charles Simic. I really enjoyed Langston Hughes. That was I had of course read him, knew a little bit about him from school. Um, knew the name, of course. I mean, he's a huge name in Harlem, Harlem Renaissance, but just really diving into him more made me realize how his reach. So that to me was really eye opening, and then also the Theodore Retke. Diving into Theodore Retke, I knew a couple poems from him, um, but I had never like My Papa's Waltz. So knew a couple poems by him and enjoyed them, but it just learning just reading more of his work. Um, yeah, just incredible, really visceral, imagery. I really enjoyed it, and musical.
Okay, yeah.
So those are, yeah, they're probably my three favorite, my three faves.
Okay, okay. I didn't actually prepare a list of three favorites, but if I could just go back and sort of glance at the episodes
Mm-hmm.
we did,
Mm-hmm.
another one that really stuck out to me was Ezra Pound,
Yeah.
and it kind of flows into what I said first about Lee Bai, but Ezra Pound, I've actually read a lot of his poetry since, and I've heard the name, especially when we're talking about the early 20th century, but I
Mm-hmm.
had never really read too much
Mm-hmm.
of his poetry, and I did not quite know the political troubles that he had, and the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sort of the sort of the conflict that was developing between him and some of the other poets at the time. So there's even a bit of a mythology that kind of developed with some of these early 20th century poetry and on into the 20th century until we get to the mid century. So and it's obviously to say that the first half of the 20th century was political would be some sort of insane understatement. But so Ezra Pound, his just some of his points of view and some of where he would pull his creativity from, I found that to be particularly fascinating, which led me to Li Bai, which a fairly old Chinese poet, from back in the day. So Li Bai, Ezra Pound was great to learn about, and the number three is going to overlap with your list, but I have to go Langston Hughes as well. Just some of his blues influence. I'm a big fan of the blues and the blues jazz influence, and how his influence is evidenced in some of the later more the beatnik poets,
Mm-hmm.
even later into the other African American poets. And yeah, Langston Hughes is and of course we read about him in school, but just to take a deep dive and
Mm-hmm.
read like some of his books and things like that. Yeah, I got to go Langston Hughes, Ezra Pound, and Lee Bai.
Yeah. 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 And it's crazy. Ezra Pound, too. It was us doing that episode was I'm currently doing like this poetry workshop, um, and we kind of it was good to do a little deep dive on Ezra Pound, a few months ago, kind of prepare me for the workshop, not knowing, um, because that Image East movement was so big, and he influenced several of the poets that we talked about, like William Carlos Williams, for instance. We did an
Right.
episode on him, and then T.S. Eliot, who we'll get into. He also, Ezra Pound edited The Wasteland,
Mm-hmm.
and had a big influence on T.S. Eliot. So his reach is yeah his influence is far reaching, and you wouldn't have he is kind of he's a little bit of a he reminds me of Kanye West in some ways. I don't know if I
Mm,
even said this on the episode, but he's like a little insane, a bit. He's a bit off his rocker, but also his creative sort of genius is undeniable. And poetry today would not look the same without Ezra Pound or the Images.
yeah, that's for sure. And he is kind of like Kanye West. He is sort of like this figure that like he's not oft talked about, or
Hmm.
at least in years past. I think that maybe moving forward, he may be spoken about more.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but Justin and I've talked about this. Like at the time when we did the episode, we weren't finding too much about Ezra Pound.
Hmm.
But then over the months, Justin's been involved in this Ezra Pound class,
Hmm.
so it may seem that there may be a resurgence of some of these early 20th century World War I era poets. We might see some more stuff coming from them.
Hmm. I wonder if it has, and it could be something political. He, I think, was tried for treason. He was
Yeah.
held in a mental institute. So it's possible that, maybe he just wasn't discussed in schools as much, especially, maybe state, you know, public schools, might not be teaching kids about Ezra Pound, because it maybe it was a little bit. This is just me guessing. I'd have to look into this, but maybe it wasn't, in fashion, for a while there, when we have to kind of be, America first post World War II, and
Especially
he was
with
not.
like think of post World War II, you pretty much think of Robert Frost,
Hmm.
uh, pretty much an institutionalist.
Hmm.
As much as I love Robert Frost, he was an institutional darling.
Hmm.
Ezra Pound was definitely not.
Right.
And Robert Frost is taught much more in schools,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially us being born in the 90s.
Hmm.
How much Robert Frost did we hear about? We basically heard
Hmm.
about it was basically Robert Frost in the 1900s, Edgar Allan Poe in the 1800s through
Hmm.
school,
Hmm.
throw some
Hmm.
William Wordsworth in there.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
and
so
I mean,
oh,
the,
pardon
I
me.
think I think that well, sorry, I think the most you might get of Ezra Pound is William Carlos Williams, and it might stop there because
Hmm.
I think like in eighth grade, I'm pretty sure it was my eighth grade English class. We read and discussed, the red wheelbarrow. Is that the name of
Hmm.
it? Yeah, so much
I think
depends
so. Yeah.
upon a red wheelbarrow.
Hmm.
Um, so and that's kind of the closest you get to the images, I think,
Right.
and then they kind of sort of cut it there, because William Carlos Williams is still is safe politically.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely makes sense. And then obviously if you maybe in like maybe your high school college classes you go into T.S. Eliot, not necessarily saying that he's an imagist, but just peripheral to that movement and of the same time period.
Hmm.
But as far as the imagists themselves, they don't get a mention.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about Ezra Pound until I was an adult researching
Hmm.
poetry on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So hey, I mean, this doing this podcast has been, and sorry, excuse me, because I have this center stage thing on, so there's no one holding the camera if you
Mm.
guys see it move, but um doing this podcast, I learned a lot. I learned as we are going through it, and it helped me with, because I write myself, it helped influence some of my writing, as we went through. So, I hope for anyone who's watching, they're learning along with us, and that's kind of the goal is to, we're not experts. We're just two guys that are interested in and like to learn and think their opinions mean something.
Yeah. And just I was actually just thinking about maybe some of the great poetry that may have maybe missed in academia. I was just thinking all through high school. I don't think I ever heard of the Beats. I don't really think I ever heard of like the any. anybody from the Beat Generation
Yeah.
or anything
Yeah.
like that. So, and they're like a little later,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I've most enjoyed about this podcast, sort of learning of some of the unsung artists. And even though I knew about some of the beats before this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
this podcast has definitely reinforced my knowledge of the Beat
Mm-hmm.
Generation and
Mm-hmm.
some of that post World War II era
Mm-hmm.
poetry, some of that World War One era poetry, and definitely some of the romantics.
Mm-hmm.
So and those and if I could pick a time period that I've of poetry that I really enjoyed, it definitely would be the the romantics themselves into the World War One and post World War II era. So that
Yeah.
150 years is a there's a lot of great poetry in in
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Yeah. Well, and I hope someday that we get to more living poets. We talked about a
Mm,
few of them,
we did.
but and there's so much rich y- tradition with poetry. It's easy to get sort of lost in the past, and I think that's sometimes you can be a little too focused on the present, as well. And that I know that's like a at least used to be a criticism of school is that you're always talking about like dead poets,
Hmm.
rather than the living ones, um, which sometimes it's hard to appreciate. Uh, you know, I guess genius when we have it right when it's
I
in front
think
of us.
there's something about some of those early poets that they're just so foundational
Hmm.
that it almost feels refreshing to go over those writers who helped shape what your ideas of poetry even are.
Hmm.
I think a lot of contemporary poets, there was a reason why we were talking about academia, and
Hmm.
there's a reason why this podcast actually we kind of compared people who are academic darlings versus people who are largely ignored by academia. That seems to be a common tension throughout the podcast, and I think that's because our we all went to school, so our notions of poetry have been colored by academia. So then when we find these great poets that are ignored by academia, it's sort of a bit of a disconnect, maybe a crisis of faith, so to speak. Like, why were these ignored? Why was this overlooked?
Hmm.
You know, um, is there anything else that I might maybe missing? And a lot of contemporary poets are basically lockstep with academia,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they're even
Yeah.
lockstep with a certain, dare I say, corporate vein of academia that I would think's been popular since, the late 90s,
Mm.
2000s. And people may say, "How dare you call academia corporate?" But I mean, come on! Like since the in the 90s and 2000s, there's definitely been a corporatization of the college, even sometimes even the high school experience. I mean, if not to stray too far, but we got professors selling their
Yeah.
own books, and
Right.
you know what I
Right.
mean.
Right. Of
Like,
course.
you know what I mean. We don't want to malign any institutions here, but
Yeah.
there's a
But.
reason
Hmm.
why we
Hmm.
academia keeps popping up when we go over these poets.
Yeah. The rise of like MFA programs and creative writing programs since the 90s. You almost need some sort of institutional backing in order to get publishing or to give yourself any kind of sort of credentials, and that's a little bit of a hope for me, like for this, like a quiet hope I've had for this podcast is that, and why I sometimes emphasize the fact that we are not experts. um, y- yes, we both went to school and went to college and things like that. But kind of trying to take back the power a little bit, from some of these institutions and say like, hey, we're just regular people and we can read this stuff and talk about it, and we don't have to have a certain viewpoint in order to do that. And we don't have to talk about it a certain way, and you don't have to have some um, sort of appeal to authority in order to be able to do these things. So, um, and hopefully maybe it sparks more conversations and more people are just like, oh yeah, I can just listen to people talk about poetry, and I can talk to people about poetry too, and I can use it as a way of talking about, anything really.
As
And
the great
so,
Bob
yeah,
Dylan said, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows."
that's a good one. Yeah.
You know, we can read.
Hmm.
We know what these
We
words
can.
mean,
Right. Yeah.
and we can interpret, and we can write for ourselves, and read
Hmm.
for ourselves. And I think that sentiment is going to be especially pertinent in the coming years
Hmm.
as we see the decline of college attendance. We see
Right.
the decline of some of these high-minded programs.
Hmm.
Colleges are starting to have to tighten their belt and kind of
Hmm. Hmm.
go back to the basics. So,
Hmm.
we see some of these MFA programs, like you mentioned, suffer. We see
Hmm.
people sort of disparaging that suffering,
Yeah.
framing it as this big calamity. But
Hmm.
whenever there's a big calamity, it's also an opportunity.
Right.
It's
Yep.
an opportunity for people such as
Hmm.
you and I to be like, you know what, there's still some value here. No need to throw
Hmm.
the baby out with the bathwater. We
Hmm.
can read these
Right.
things for ourselves.
Right.
We can
Hmm.
interpret these things for ourselves. And,
Yep.
not to get off topic, but, I'm not the first person to construe academia as this priest class
Right. Right.
that interprets text
Hmm.
for the masses.
Hmm. Well,
And
I
I
think,
think
yeah.
that paradigm is ending.
Hmm. I don't think it's getting off too off topic, because I think in general you can frame this conversation we're having as um, sort of a philosophical mission statement in a way,
Mm,
or purpose. And I think that that purpose is to kind of bring power back to the people. It's a bit more of a democratic sort of process, and like you say, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The point of education, and I'm going to make a little sidebar. The point of education is to learn, is to edify yourself, and so it's not to make money. And I think that that's where we've kind of fallen off, is that you think that, okay, I'm going to go to school to make money, and now we're disappointed. And we should have never, I don't know, learning that it brings value to yourself. It doesn't bring value to the market. And
yeah.
so you shouldn't expect rewards from the market for that. And so,
Knowledge is its own end.
yes, yeah. And
It's a good
yes,
in and of itself.
it's an intransitive process, right? It's like a flower blooming. It's an intransitive verb, essentially, is learning. And so, I think that hopefully, we can kind of encourage people to, hey, you don't need, not saying that people are going to watch this podcast and they're going to go, hey, you know what, I don't need to go to school, I'm just going to listen to these guys. That's not what I'm saying here. That's not the hope. The hope
Right.
is that someday people may, take back their learning into their own hands.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not even about you and I. Like I was saying, the colleges themselves are shoring up some of these programs.
Hmm.
You might there's not as many colleges offering masters in poetry and masters in English literature as it was in days past. Nowadays a lot of the colleges are turning towards you're more like your tech and your
Hmm.
the STEM and
Hmm.
things like that.
Right.
So this tightening of the belt is not like I said, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for
Hmm.
people like you and I to
Right.
put our 2 cents in.
Right. Especially in we say it's an attention economy. There's this,
Mm,
everything is about our attention. And, for people, also to take back their sort of attention is, hey, like, let's learn, right?
mm,
Let's read books. Let's talk and discuss about these things. We don't have to talk about whatever's trending on, sort of the internet. It's almost, you it's almost a political move in a way to read old
mm,
books and to sort of disengage from the current conversation. I think it gives you a fresh perspective too. Um, and
I think
so,
so.
yeah, and instead of focusing on whatever's kind of trending or happening on TikTok or something like that, you put your attention and focus towards creative pursuit. I think that's the way that we sort of kind of fight back from this kind of overwhelming onslaught of essentially, advertising that we get, by scrolling on our phones.
Right. The battle is for your attention,
Hmm.
and it's
Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
for what you consider to be worthwhile.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to say. Hey, this is worthwhile.
right. Right. That's definitely one thing that I can definitely agree. This is worthwhile.
Hmm.
This poetry is worthwhile for sure.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yep.
it's one of those things. Poetry is one of those things where you don't realize how deep it seeps into you
Mm-hmm.
until lines come. Something will happen and lines will
Yep.
come back to your
Hmm.
mind.
Yep. Yep.
And you'll be like, wow, like I've really stuck with me more than I kind of thought it did. Or, I wasn't, it's not like I was ruminating on this or like,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
uh, or anything like that. It's just over the course of my life, events happen and, lines sort of come to your head, so
Hmm. Yeah, the same with it's like music. Anyone who's
yeah,
watching, they might not have had that experience with poetry, but if you've had that experience with music where some lyrics just came into your head, the same can happen with poetry,
for sure.
it and you didn't try to learn. I mean, maybe sometimes you do try to learn music lyrics, and you really
Hmm.
do focus on them, but sometimes you don't, and it does just sort of seep into you, kind of changes your consciousness a little bit.
Right.
um you know yeah, so but hey, I mean, that's kind of our goal with this podcast, make it conversational. I've been rewatching our episodes. I've learned quite a lot. I've learned a lot not to do. Hopefully, I'm better in the future, and um, we can just continue to improve this and continue exploring and learning, and hopefully, you know anyone who's been keeping up with us, and hopefully more people begin to in the future.
That would be fantastic. So, hey,
Yep.
more the
Yep.
merrier.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to just have like people like that we could like like an email list or something, or just
Mm-hmm.
people getting down in the comments talking about
Mm-hmm.
this, and people being
Mm-hmm.
like, well, if you guys like this, check out this, and people
Mm-hmm.
being like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I never said that before. And
Yep.
you sort of a bit of a communal aspect. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I would
Mm-hmm.
love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. And I don't know if people realize this. We're tired of just talking to each other. Okay. We need other people to get into these conversations. Okay. We've been doing this for a long time. All right. Beyond the podcast, we need some people to mix it up with, guys. Come on.
Right.
So, right.
we
Yeah.
we yes, that's true. We Justin and I have been talking about this stuff for years. Like, come on,
Right.
somebody else,
Yeah. I mean,
anybody.
yeah. Like, yeah. Someone to tag in here. All right.
Yeah, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Just jump
Yeah.
in, like,
Mm-hmm. Please. Please. Yeah.
and I know that'll happen eventually. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, if you build it, they will come. So, do you have any? We're just doing. This is a short one. Just doing a quick recap, kind of letting you guys know what the future is going to entail. And yeah, I mean, James, you have any sign off thoughts?
now really stay tuned. We're gonna be,
Mm-hmm.
doing our best to bring you some great poetry analysis. We
Mm-hmm.
got some heavy hitters coming up, a
Yep.
lot of good poetry to read, a lot of good poems to choose from. So
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm excited to get going, get rocking and rolling.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree with that. Well, hey, so if you've been watching this, thank you. And, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on your notifications,
Right.
all that stuff. Comment on it and share it with your family. Um,
Family and friends, yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe your
Mm-hmm.
dad's into poetry. Your
Right.
dad's just
Yeah.
reading in the
Yeah.
basement. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, dad, I came across these guys talking
Yeah.
poetry. Maybe check them out.
Maybe there's someone that you've been at odds with and you want to try and build a bridge. I think that this podcast could be a good way to start that. I don't know. I'm thinking of things. We're trying stuff out here.
See if you see, show some of your enemies this. Be like, look,
Absolutely. Right.
this type of stuff I'm on. You really
Yeah.
want to hate a guy that's watching a
Right.
poetry podcast
Yeah.
like this? Come on.
Right. And look, we're all about learning old lessons. That is keeping your enemies closer than your friends.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, for
keep your friends
sure.
close, keep your enemies closer. Share with your enemies what is deep down in your soul. It's poetry.
I send my enemies some poetic lines sometimes.
I do too. I recite poetry. I recite poetry to my enemies. Yeah, show them.
Right, right.
Yeah, fools. Um, anyways, all right. Well, hey, thanks again for watching, guys, and yeah, we look forward to bringing you new stuff. And
Hey,
that's me signing off. That's Justin.
take care, everyone. I'll see you guys later. We've been Verse Take.